Jonathan Blake had spent years building Franklin National Bank into one of the most respected financial institutions in the country. From sleek skyscraper headquarters to regional branches across multiple states, the bank had become a symbol of trust, professionalism, and financial stability. But in recent months, things had started to unravel. Customer satisfaction plummeted. Complaints poured in from all directions. Jonathan had read every report and sat through every boardroom explanation, but something didn't sit right. Data could be manipulated, and polished presentations could mask the truth. If he really wanted to understand what was going wrong inside his own bank, he needed to see it for himself, from the ground level. So, on a chilly Monday morning, Jonathan stood in front of branch 219, just another face in the downtown crowd. Gone were the tailored suits and polished leather shoes. Today, he wore faded jeans, a second-hand windbreaker, and a baseball cap pulled low over slightly unshaven stubble. His reflection in the bank's glass doors was unrecognizable, even to him. The transformation was deliberate. He wasn't here as the CEO of Franklin National. He was here as Mr. John Miller, a freelance graphic designer seeking a small business loan. Armed with a new identity, an airtight financial profile, and a purpose, he took a deep breath and stepped inside the branch. The air inside the bank was cool and sterile, carrying a faint scent of disinfectant and printer toner. The marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. An attempt at creating a calming atmosphere. But the mood among customers told a different story. Tension lingered like smoke in the air. Jonathan joined the back of a short line, observing everything. The staff behind the counters, the digital kiosks blinking idly, the security guard pretending not to stare too long at anyone. Every detail felt eerily detached from the values he had proudly instilled in the organization years ago. As he stood waiting, Jonathan's ears caught a sharp, hushed conversation near the seating area. A middle-aged man in a neatly pressed suit was speaking with barely concealed frustration. "I've been banking here for over 20 years, the man said, voice tight with restrained anger. Perfect credit, never missed a payment, and they rejected my business expansion loan without so much as a real explanation." Across from him, an elderly woman clutched a worn leather handbag, nodding sympathetically. Her voice trembled as she added, "I came in last week because my entire life savings, my granddaughter's college fund, just vanished. I begged for answers, and all I got was a script and a shrug." Jonathan's posture stiffened. These weren't just isolated complaints, these were deep, personal betrayals. Stories like these shouldn't happen at any bank, let alone his. He edged closer to the brochure stand, pretending to browse mortgage options while keeping an ear on the conversation. The man continued, lowering his voice. "My sister owns a successful restaurant. She was denied too, until someone inside suggested she make an unofficial payment to speed things along." The woman gasped softly. "You mean a bribe? In this bank?" The man simply nodded, pulling a business card from his coat. "I'm Brian Carter. If you want to fight this, call me. Maybe, if enough of us speak up." Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't expected to hear this, at least not so soon. Bribery? Disappearing funds? Collateral damage that reached into retirement accounts and children's futures? He watched as a young teller called out, "Mrs. Henderson!" The elderly woman gathered her things and slowly made her way to the counter. Her shoulders slumped with visible weight, the kind that only decades of sacrifice followed by betrayal could create. Jonathan stayed where he was, eyes following her with growing concern. This wasn't just poor service, it was something far more insidious. As she began speaking to the teller, her voice cracked with emotion. "Please," she said. "My husband worked 2 jobs for 40 years. That money was for our granddaughter. I just need someone to explain where it went." The teller barely looked up. "Ma'am, all transactions on your account appear authorized. You're welcome to file another complaint if you wish." The robotic reply stung even from a distance. Jonathan clenched his jaw. He had come here expecting minor inefficiencies, but this was something else, something systemic. He wasn't just investigating customer experience anymore. He was about to uncover something that went much deeper than denied loans and long wait times, and he knew, in that moment, there was no turning back. Jonathan Blake stood silently at the brochure stand, flipping through a pamphlet about mortgage refinancing, but his attention remained fixed on the conversation unfolding just a few feet away. The man, well-dressed, middle-aged, and clearly upset, was trying to maintain his composure, but the bitterness in his voice seeped through each sentence. "I've built my business from the ground up," he said, tapping a well-manicured finger against the armrest of the waiting room chair. "Never defaulted on a payment. Credit score in the high 800s. Plenty of assets. And still, they rejected my loan without giving me a real reason." His name, as Jonathan would soon learn, was Brian Carter. Everything about him, from his firm posture to the careful cadence of his speech, suggested he was a man who was used to being in control. But today he looked tired and disillusioned, like someone who had just realized the rules he'd played by no longer applied. Sitting across from Brian was a frail, elderly woman with a soft, time-worn face. Her hands clutched a weathered brown handbag that looked like it had been with her through several decades of life. "I'm so sorry to hear that," she said gently. "I've had my own troubles lately, too." Her voice was faint, but the pain it carried was unmistakable. "I came in last month because my granddaughter's college fund, every last cent of it, just disappeared from my savings account. I saved for 15 years. I didn't touch a dollar of it, and now it's gone, and no one here will even explain what happened." She paused, swallowing hard. "They said the transfers were authorized, but I never made them. I wouldn't even know how." Jonathan felt a wave of nausea rise in his chest. He had read reports about unusual account activity, particularly among elderly clients, but he had assumed, hoped, they were just outliers, rare glitches in the system. But the despair in Mrs. Henderson's eyes made it all too real. Her story wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It was a human tragedy, and from the way she spoke, it wasn't being treated with any urgency. She looked down at her handbag, then up at Brian, her voice barely above a whisper. "My husband worked 2 jobs until the day he died. We never took vacations, never splurged, all so our granddaughter wouldn't have to take out student loans. And now, I have to look her in the eye and tell her it's gone." Brian leaned forward, his voice softer but no less intense. "You're not alone. My sister owns a successful cafe a few blocks from here. She went through the exact same thing. Perfect financials, loyal customer, and they kept delaying her loan, telling her the system was reviewing it, asking for extra documents. It went on for weeks." He paused, scanning the room before continuing. "Until someone pulled her aside and suggested she grease the wheels to move things along." Jonathan's brows furrowed. Brian's tone turned bitter. A bribe. That's what they meant, cash under the table to get something she was already qualified for. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open slightly, stunned. "A bribe? In a bank like this?" she asked, glancing around with disbelief. Brian nodded solemnly. "I didn't believe her at first either, but the more I asked around, the more I realized she wasn't the only one. There's something going on here, something that doesn't show up on the surface." He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a business card. "My name's Brian Carter. I'm a financial consultant. If you want help, if you want to fight back, give me a call. I'm trying to get others together, people like us, people who've been wronged but are too afraid or too tired to raise their voices alone." Jonathan watched the exchange unfold with mounting dread. These were not random complaints. These were intelligent, detail-oriented individuals who had spent their lives doing everything by the book, only to be punished for it. This wasn't just a customer service failure. It was systematic, targeted, and deeply unethical. As Mrs. Henderson quietly tucked Brian's card into her purse, the teller at the counter called her name. She stood slowly, thanked Brian, and walked to the front, shoulders slumped beneath the invisible weight of disappointment and helplessness. Jonathan didn't move. His heart pounded in his ears. These people had come seeking fairness, and instead found silence, avoidance, and veiled corruption. And now, it was his job, not as a CEO, but as a human being, to do something about it. Jonathan stood rooted near the brochure stand, his gaze fixed on Mrs. Louise Henderson as she approached the teller's counter with slow, deliberate steps. Her posture was hunched, her worn handbag clutched tightly against her chest, as if it were the last piece of security she had left. The young teller behind the glass didn't even look up right away. With a rehearsed monotone, she recited, "All transactions on your account appear to be properly authorized, ma'am." The words were cold, robotic, clearly memorized. "But I've already filed 3 complaints," Mrs. Henderson pleaded, her voice trembling. "That money was for my granddaughter's future. My husband and I—" Her sentence cut short as her voice cracked under the weight of desperation. "There must be someone who can help." The teller remained unfazed. "You're welcome to file another formal complaint." Then, with a casual press of a button beneath the desk, she summoned security. 2 guards arrived moments later, tall, silent, and emotionless. Without saying much, they flanked Mrs. Henderson, gently but firmly guiding her away from the counter. "Please," she whispered, turning back to the teller. "I just want to understand what happened to my money." Her protest fell on deaf ears. Other customers looked away awkwardly, some pretending to read their phones, others simply staring at the floor. Jonathan watched in horror as the guards escorted her toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the cold lobby. The door closed behind her, and just like that, the atmosphere in the bank returned to a sterile calm, as if nothing had happened. But for Jonathan, everything had changed. That single moment carved a permanent crack in his image of the bank he had spent a lifetime building. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out discreetly, Jonathan glanced at the screen. An automated notification from Franklin National's mobile app, addressed to John Miller, his undercover alias. The subject line made his stomach drop. "Your loan application has been denied." His heart skipped a beat. Denied? That couldn't be right. He had crafted the profile meticulously. Excellent credit, stable income, clean banking history. There were no red flags, no reason to reject the application. Unless, of course, there was more going on behind the scenes, something far more sinister than flawed underwriting. He stared at the screen in disbelief. The same empty message Mrs. Henderson had likely received. "We regret to inform you that your loan application has not been approved at this time." The weight of the denial settled into his chest, heavier than he'd anticipated. This wasn't just about loans or numbers anymore. It was about integrity, about trust. Jonathan had always believed in Franklin National's mission to serve people. Real people. Families saving for college, small business owners chasing their dreams, retirees preserving their hard-earned money. And now, in the span of 30 minutes, he had witnessed a grandmother dismissed like a nuisance, a business owner forced to consider bribery, and a fraudulent rejection of a loan that should have sailed through. It wasn't a glitch. It was a pattern. A deliberate, coordinated pattern. Trying to maintain his composure, Jonathan slowly walked toward the back wall of the lobby, where a few faux leather chairs were arranged in a waiting area. He sank into one of them, staring blankly at a motivational poster about financial freedom. The image of a mountain sunrise, paired with a hollow caption, "Your future starts here," felt almost cruel in context. Around him, the bank hummed with routine indifference. Customers approached tellers, managers walked briskly across the floor, phones rang, printers clicked, but beneath the polished veneer, Jonathan could sense it now, an invisible rot eating away at the foundation. The more he replayed the morning in his head, the clearer the picture became. First, the unjust denial of Brian Carter's business loan, then Mrs. Henderson's missing savings, brushed off with bureaucratic deflection. His own fake identity, built to be bulletproof, treated as disposable. These weren't coincidences, they were symptoms. And like any infection, they pointed to something deeper, festering out of sight. He thought back to Brian's words, They suggested she grease the wheels. It all made sense now. The system wasn't just flawed, it was being manipulated, hijacked by individuals or networks exploiting their positions for personal gain and burying victims in paperwork and apathy. Jonathan stood up slowly, his mind racing. What he had seen today was only the surface. He hadn't even scratched the real machinery beneath it all. If this level of corruption was happening at just one branch, what was going on across the rest of the network? How many people had been silenced, dismissed, or robbed without ever realizing what was really happening? He knew the time for observation was over. The time for action had begun. But first, he needed proof. Real, undeniable proof, because what he was uncovering wasn't just a service failure. It was a systemic betrayal of everything Franklin National claimed to stand for. And if it wasn't stopped now, it would only grow stronger, more hidden, more dangerous. Jonathan Blake followed the teller's direction down a narrow corridor that led to the loan consultation offices. The hallway was quieter than the rest of the bank, its air somehow colder, heavier. Generic motivational posters lined the beige walls. Opportunity starts here, and your dreams are priority. But after what he'd just witnessed in the lobby, the slogans felt like cruel jokes. At the end of the hall, a door stood half open, with a printed nameplate. Kelly Simmons, Loan Officer. He knocked lightly, and a young woman with tightly pulled back blonde hair and a professional, if forced, smile looked up from her computer. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, referring to his undercover identity. "Come in, have a seat." Jonathan nodded politely and stepped inside, lowering himself into the hard chair opposite her desk. The room was small, sterile, and windowless, almost like an interrogation chamber. A single desk lamp added a warm glow, but it did little to soften the sharp tension in the air. Kelly pulled up his file and tapped quickly on her keyboard. "I understand you're here about your loan application," she said, her tone light but impersonal. "Yes," Jonathan replied calmly. "I just received notice that it was denied. I'd like to understand why. From what I submitted, my financials should have been solid." She hesitated, eyes locked on the monitor. "The system uses a highly complex algorithm," she said, rehearsed. "It evaluates multiple risk factors that may not be immediately visible in traditional credit assessments." Her fingers tapped nervously. "Sometimes even excellent profiles can raise certain red flags." Jonathan leaned forward slightly, pressing gently. "Could you tell me what those red flags were? I'd just like to know what criteria I failed to meet." Kelly didn't meet his eyes. "Unfortunately, the exact formula is proprietary. We're not allowed to disclose specific scoring breakdowns. It's all automated and, well, very few people even understand how the algorithm works." As she spoke, Jonathan's eyes wandered around the desk. Her setup was clean, but not meticulously so. A stack of manila folders sat to her left, a half-drunk coffee cup to her right. Then he noticed it. A yellow sticky note stuck beneath her monitor, almost obscured by her keyboard. Scribbled on it in blue ink were the words, "Call Doug for special cases." His gaze lingered for only a second, but it was long enough. Kelly caught his glance, and in one quick, unthinking motion, she snatched the sticky note, crumpled it in her palm, and dropped it into the trash bin beside her chair. The smile she offered afterward was tighter than before, her posture slightly stiffer. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Just a reminder for an internal call, nothing important." But Jonathan wasn't convinced. The name Doug and the phrase "special cases" echoed in his mind like warning bells. He sat back, shifting to a different tactic. "Listen," he said in a more confidential tone. "I understand that some things don't always go through the normal channels, and I get that sometimes you need to know who to talk to or how things really get done. So, tell me, off the record, is there a way to push this through? I've got a lot riding on this loan." Kelly's fingers paused mid-keystroke. She looked at him for a long second, assessing. Then she leaned in just slightly and lowered her voice. "There are alternative pathways," she said, choosing her words carefully. "They're not publicly advertised, and they aren't technically part of the standard process, but they do exist." Jonathan nodded slowly, pretending to follow her lead. And these alternative pathways, how do they work? Kelly glanced at the door before answering. Well, it depends on the loan size. For something like yours, $50,000, 0 cents. There's usually a processing fee involved. Standard, discreet, cash only. Jonathan kept his face neutral, but inside he felt the heat of rising fury. And how much would that be? He asked. She didn't hesitate. 5,000, she said flatly. It guarantees approval and immediate release of funds within 72 hours, but it has to be handled through a third-party coordinator. Her eyes flicked toward the trash can, where the sticky note now lay buried. You'll be given a name and a contact number if you decide to proceed. There it was. The confirmation he'd feared, but expected. The bank he had trusted and led for years had allowed its lending system to become a playground for kickbacks and backdoor deals. Customers weren't just being underserved, they were being exploited. And the people enabling it weren't rogue outsiders, they were employees, embedded in the very system he helped design. Kelly straightened up again, her demeanor shifting back to polite professionalism. Of course, she added with a soft smile. If you're not interested, you're welcome to reapply in 6 months. The system might flag you differently by then. Jonathan offered a practiced chuckle, masking the storm brewing beneath his surface. I'll need some time to think about it, he replied. Can I get the name and number anyway, just so I know who to contact if I decide to go that route? Kelly hesitated, then scribbled something on a clean sticky note and slid it across the desk. Douglas Wong, Senior Coordinator, it read, followed by a local number. Jonathan took the note, nodded, and stood. Thanks for your time, Ms. Simmons. You've been very helpful. He left the room with a quiet but burning resolve. Now he had a name, a contact, and confirmation of corruption within his walls, and he was one step closer to dismantling the rotten machinery. Peace. Jonathan had barely finished pocketing the sticky note with Douglas Wong written in Kelly Simmons's neat handwriting when the office door burst open. A young woman stood in the doorway, her face flushed with distress, strands of hair falling from a loose ponytail, and her eyes red as if she'd been crying for hours. Miss Simmons, she gasped, ignoring Jonathan entirely. I need to speak with you. It's about my mother's account again. Kelly's pleasant facade dissolved into irritation. Miss Chen, she said sharply, as I've explained before, all of your mother's transactions have been reviewed and confirmed as properly authorized. The woman stepped forward, voice cracking. But she has dementia. She couldn't have authorized anything. Her entire savings is gone, and the nursing home is threatening to evict her because the payments bounced. You said you'd help me. You promised last week. Kelly stood, her voice firm and dismissive. I told you the matter was closed. We've done everything by protocol. If you have further concerns, you're welcome to submit another formal inquiry. Rachel Chen's eyes widened in disbelief. Formal inquiry? I've filed 2 already. You haven't even returned my calls. That money was her life savings. She doesn't even remember how to use an ATM anymore. How could you say she approved multiple outgoing transfers in 1 week? Jonathan watched closely, his instincts screaming. The pain in Rachel's voice wasn't performative. It was raw, desperate, and real, and Kelly's response was nothing short of bureaucratic ice. There was no empathy, no concern, just procedural stonewalling. Rachel stepped closer, clutching a small folder in her hands, probably filled with paperwork, medical records, maybe even photos. Please, I'm begging you, just look again. I don't know where else to go. I've been to 3 branches and nobody will even sit down with me. Kelly pressed a hidden button under her desk. Within moments, the same 2 security guards who had escorted Mrs. Henderson out of the building earlier appeared at the door. Miss Chen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Kelly said calmly, as if reading from a policy manual. Rachel took a step back, visibly shaken. You can't be serious. My mother worked for this bank for 30 years, and now that she needs help, you treat her like a liability? One of the guards gently took her arm. Please, Ma'am, he said, let's not make this harder than it has to be. Rachel looked around one last time, her voice breaking. I just want someone to care. The door closed behind her with a dull click, and the room went quiet again. Jonathan remained seated, stunned by what he had just witnessed. Rachel Chen's story mirrored Mrs. Henderson's. Elderly customers with cognitive challenges losing their entire savings with no accountability, no transparency, and no support. But unlike Mrs. Henderson, Rachel had come armed with evidence, questions, and a fiery determination to protect her mother. And still she had been shown the door, as if she were the problem. Jonathan turned slowly back to Kelly, who was already composing herself, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. "Rough day," she muttered under her breath, offering him a hollow smile. "You were saying something about alternative channels?" Her ability to pivot back to sales mode so effortlessly sent a chill down his spine. "Yes," Jonathan said carefully, leaning forward again. "You mentioned special cases. I'd like to explore that option further. Who would I speak to?" Kelly hesitated for a moment, then reached into her drawer and pulled out a different business card. This one embossed with the bank's logo and a name printed in bold. Douglas Wong, Senior Coordinator. "He handles all discretionary approvals," she said. "But like I mentioned, it's very selective." "He doesn't take just anyone." Jonathan took the card, reading the name slowly as if to imprint it in memory. Douglas Wong. It was the second time today he'd heard that name, and now it had come with a face, a title, and a function. He thanked Kelly with a nod, stood, and turned to leave. But inside he was already shifting gears, no longer just collecting data, but preparing for confrontation. As he stepped out of Kelly's office and back into the corridor, Jonathan felt the gravity of what he was beginning to uncover. This wasn't just a case of poor oversight or a few bad apples bending the rules. It was systemic, organized, and targeted. Elderly customers, emotionally distressed families, people least able to defend themselves were being quietly exploited through a network of stone-faced policies and under-the-table deals. And now that he had a name and 2 victims in the span of a single hour, Jonathan knew he was only scratching the surface. Behind every closed door in this bank, there could be a dozen more Rachel Chens and Mrs. Hendersons, people robbed not just of money, but of dignity. He clenched his jaw, tucked the card into his pocket, and made his way to the elevator. The time for silent observation was over. The real investigation had just begun. The moment Jonathan Blake stepped out of branch 219, the cool afternoon air hit him like a slap. He exhaled slowly, trying to center himself, but his mind was spinning. The sticky note with Douglas Wong's name still burned in his pocket, and the images of Rachel Chen and Mrs. Henderson being escorted out haunted him like ghosts. He had seen enough. This wasn't a customer service issue, it was systemic manipulation. He needed data, evidence, proof strong enough to bring an institution like Franklin National Bank to its knees, if necessary. That meant only one person, Lauren Davis. She wasn't just an internal auditor. She was the one person in the company Jonathan trusted without question. Intelligent, precise, and fiercely ethical. Lauren had quietly helped him through several critical internal investigations before. If anyone could trace patterns in a mountain of financial data, it was her. That evening, back in his private study at home, far from the eyes and ears of the bank, Jonathan pulled out a secure, encrypted phone and dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring. "Jonathan," she answered, surprise in her voice. "You never use this line unless—" "I need you to run something," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Quietly. Completely off the grid." He explained everything, his undercover visit, the loan denial, the disturbing treatment of elderly clients, and the names Douglas Wong and Kelly Simmons. "I want a full audit on loan rejections from the past 6 months, he instructed. "Focus on applicants with high credit scores and perfect documentation. Cross-check with sudden fund drains, especially among seniors or people flagged for cognitive impairments." There was a long pause on the line. "That's thousands of records," Lauren finally said. "And if what you're suggesting is true, this could go all the way up." Jonathan's reply was calm but firm. "Exactly. And I trust no one else but you to look into it." The next morning, as he drove through the city to clear his mind, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every turn he made, every stoplight, he caught the same black sedan in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought it was just coincidence, a car in a crowded city, nothing more. But then it followed him off the highway exit, through 2 right turns, and even into the underground parking garage of a coffee shop where he hadn't planned to stop. He sat in his parked car, engine running, and watched as the sedan idled just outside the garage entrance. Tinted windows, no plates on the front, no one stepped out. A chill crept down his spine. Then his phone buzzed. A text, no name, no number, just a message. "You're asking the wrong questions. Back off while you still can." Jonathan stared at the screen for a long time before deleting the message. He looked up. The sedan was gone. That evening, just past 9 p.m., his secure line rang again. It was Lauren. Her voice was tight, rushed. Nothing like her usual calm tone. "Jonathan, we need to meet, not on the phone, not over email, in person, as soon as possible." "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. There was a silence. "Someone broke into my apartment," she said quietly. "They didn't take anything valuable, just my work laptop, but I had already separated the key files. They didn't find the backups." Jonathan's grip on the phone tightened. "You think this is connected?" "I don't think. I know," Lauren whispered. "What I found isn't just loan fraud or clerical error. There are networks of accounts tied to shell companies, and they're moving money out in patterns that don't make sense unless someone's orchestrating it deliberately." Her voice dropped lower. "I think we're looking at a laundering scheme. A big one, and it's embedded inside the bank's core systems." Jonathan's mind raced. Everything was escalating faster than he'd expected. It had started with a fake loan application and a few angry customers. Now it was break-ins, surveillance, and laundered money. And someone, maybe multiple people, was watching. "Where do you want to meet?" he asked. "The Coffee Bean on Lincoln and 4th, Lauren replied. "Tomorrow morning, 7 IEM. It's public and safe. I'll bring the drive. But Jonathan, don't tell anyone, not even your assistant. We don't know how far this goes." He agreed, then hung up and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Someone had tried to silence Lauren. Someone had warned him to walk away. That only meant one thing: he was getting close. And whatever they were trying to hide, it was big enough to warrant threats. Later that night, Jonathan checked every security system in his home. He backed up his phone, encrypted his emails, and slept with his encrypted laptop locked in a fireproof safe beneath the floorboards. He replayed the events of the last 48 hours in his head. Brian Carter's outrage, Mrs. Henderson's despair, Rachel Chen's heartbreak, Kelly Simmons's cold precision. Then he thought of the black sedan, the crumpled sticky note, and Douglas Wong's business card. Then, one by one, the pieces began forming a picture he didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about corruption. It was something else, something deeper, more dangerous. And if Lauren was right, if this scheme went beyond simple fraud, then Franklin National Bank wasn't just broken. It had been compromised from the inside. Now the only question left was, how high did it go? And who else was willing to bury the truth to protect it? The lobby of St. Mark's Hospital was quiet at 6:55 a.m., bathed in the dull orange hue of early morning light filtering through tall windows. Jonathan entered wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and a plain black coat, nothing that would attract attention. He didn't go to the front desk, didn't ask for directions. He knew exactly where to go. The 5th floor, oncology wing waiting room, was nearly deserted at this hour. A few tired nurses shuffled past with clipboards, and the smell of sterile floors and brewed coffee filled the air. In the farthest corner, seated next to a vending machine, was Lauren Davis. Her posture was rigid, her eyes scanning the hallway. When she saw Jonathan, her body relaxed only slightly. She was still in yesterday's clothes, her usually neat hair now messy and loose, and a tremor in her hands betrayed just how close danger had come. "Thanks for coming," she said as he sat down beside her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive taped to the bottom of a chewing gum wrapper. "Dialey didn't find this," she whispered. "I kept it hidden in my grandmother's jewelry box." Jonathan took the drive and quickly tucked it inside his inner coat pocket. "What exactly am I looking at?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Lauren pulled out a worn notepad, pages covered in color-coded highlights and hand-drawn arrows. It started with what you asked for, loan rejections, but then I noticed something odd. Every time a legitimate loan was denied, another loan for the exact same amount was approved within a few days. Different name, different business, but the same amount. Almost down to the dollar. She flipped through her notes. The approved loans go to shell corporations. Most of them are registered under fake names, many in states with lenient business disclosure laws. From there, the funds are funneled to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Belize, Singapore, places with minimal financial oversight. Jonathan frowned. Money laundering? Lauren shook her head. Worse. Coordinated embezzlement. It's being done through a parallel approval process. She leaned in closer. And here's where it gets dangerous. The USB contains internal communications, emails, routing approvals, even system-level overrides. Someone built a backdoor into the loan approval software. They're bypassing protocol altogether. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Who's involved? Lauren opened a folded spreadsheet tucked in the back of her notebook. 5 names popped up consistently. One of them is Douglas Wong. He's listed as the review coordinator for 82 of the fraudulent loans. But he's not working alone. There are payments traced to 3 senior executives in the risk management division and 1 in compliance. She showed him a second sheet. Each of them has received large consulting bonuses from the shell entities receiving the loans. Bonuses that don't appear on their bank payroll but match transactions in the laundering chain. This isn't isolated fraud. It's a fully integrated top-level conspiracy. Jonathan stared at the list of names, all of them familiar, people he had trusted, dined with, promoted. His stomach turned. How far back does it go? He asked. Lauren checked her notes again. At least 18 months, maybe longer. It ramped up over the last 6, just as complaints started flooding in. They're getting bolder, larger sums, more aggressive patterns, fewer safeguards. And there's one more thing. She opened a folder of printouts. The accounts being drained the most often belong to vulnerable customers, elderly clients, people with cognitive impairments, and even veterans. They target the ones least likely to notice or be able to fight back. Some of the accounts even had power of attorney flags in place, and the signatures were forged anyway. It's predatory, and it's precise. Jonathan felt the weight of the drive in his pocket like a live grenade. This wasn't just about financial misconduct. It was a moral crime against the most defenseless members of the community, and now he held the evidence. How many people know you're working on this? He asked. Just you, Lauren replied. And they already tried to shut me down once. That means we're getting close. A nurse passed by, and they both instinctively went silent until the hallway cleared again. This needs to go to the authorities, Jonathan said, but we can't do it through official bank channels. If it's this high up, legal and internal affairs might already be compromised. Lauren nodded in agreement. I have one contact in the FBI's cyber division. I used to work with her on a data privacy task force. We can try to set up a secure draw. They stood together, trying to look like 2 people visiting a relative, but their hearts were racing. As they walked slowly toward the elevator, Jonathan kept glancing behind them. Every movement felt suspicious, every face a potential threat. Once inside, he pressed the button for the lobby. What happens if this goes public? Lauren asked quietly. People will lose faith in Franklin National. In you. Jonathan exhaled slowly. Then so be it. I'd rather tear the whole thing down than let this rot continue under my name. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the waking world of patients, nurses, and breakfast deliveries. On the surface, everything looked normal, but underneath the truth was unraveling. And now that he had the keys to expose it, Jonathan knew there was no turning back. The fraud network was real, and this was just the beginning of a much darker web. The next morning, Jonathan arrived at Franklin National's headquarters well before sunrise, the skyline still cloaked in shadows. Dressed in a plain grey hoodie and dark jeans, he moved like a ghost through the parking structure's maintenance entrance. No driver, No assistant. He used his personal executive badge, still active, to access the lower levels of the building. His destination wasn't the boardroom or his top-floor office. It was the basement, specifically an old server room that had been decommissioned during the last major tech upgrade. Most staff had forgotten it even existed, but Jonathan hadn't. He remembered every blueprint of this building, every unused corridor, every hidden room. And right now, he needed a place where no one could track what he was about to do. The air in the basement was stale, thick with the scent of dust and faint mildew. The hallway lights flickered as he passed through the narrow corridor leading to the server room door. He swiped his keycard and entered, greeted by a low mechanical hum. The faint sound of ancient machines still drawing power. Despite being disconnected from the main operational network, the terminal stations here were hardwired to a legacy server that no one had thought to dismantle. It was isolated, secure, exactly what he needed. Jonathan sat at the nearest console, booted it up, and inserted Lauren's USB. As the files opened, lines of code and spreadsheets began to pour across the screen. Transactions, internal messages, routing protocols, all meticulously catalogued. But then he found a folder labeled Project Sentinel. It was buried 5 subfolders deep, encrypted and password protected. He guessed the passcode, his own executive ID number, and, to his astonishment, it worked. The contents made his breath catch. Project Sentinel wasn't just an internal risk program. It was a clandestine surveillance and manipulation network embedded within the bank's infrastructure. The documents outlined a long-term operation that used client data, not just financial histories, but behavioral patterns, geographic movement, communications metadata, to build psychological profiles. The end goal wasn't just to identify loan risks, it was to flag individuals with access to government systems, military records, and secure networks. Those individuals were then subtly pushed into financial stress through targeted denials, account errors, and delays, until they were vulnerable enough to be approached. The project then connected those individuals to consultants, posing as third-party advisors, offering high-interest loans or under-the-table deals. What looked like predatory lending was, in truth, a recruitment system for espionage. Jonathan stared at the screen, stunned. His bank had been used as a gateway to infiltrate sensitive government assets. Franklin National wasn't just compromised, it had become a weapon. He was so absorbed in what he was reading that he almost missed the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Quick, confident strides. Jonathan extinguished the screen, yanked out the USB, and slid behind one of the tall server racks just as the door creaked open. 2 figures entered. He couldn't see them directly, but the voices were unmistakable. "You're sure it's him?" one voice asked. It was Douglas Wong, the other voice responded, a lower, gruffer tone. "Tom Bradford, the bank's head of security. It has to be. He was the only one who knew about that access point in legal affairs. Plus, the timestamp on the login matches the CEO's executive badge. We can't risk him taking this outside." Jonathan held his breath, heart pounding. "I told you it was a mistake not to lock him out earlier," Bradford growled. "He's always had too much access, too many back doors." "Relax," Wong replied. "We'll frame it like stress. He's overworked, paranoid, maybe even unwell. If we do this right, no one will question it." A pause, then the unmistakable sound of a lighter flicking, one of Wong's tells. "And Lauren?" Bradford asked. "She's a loose end." Wong exhaled slowly. "She'll be handled. But Chin's the real problem. He has the authority, the credibility. If he goes public with this, it won't just be bad. It'll collapse the entire operation. Not just here, everywhere." The 2 men moved deeper into the room, their footsteps drawing closer to Jonathan's hiding place. He crouched lower, his hands tightening around the drive, still warm from the machine. He had to get out, now. If they found him, they wouldn't hesitate. They wouldn't ask questions. This was no longer corporate corruption. It was a full-blown intelligence breach, and they were treating it like a Black Ops cleanup. After several minutes that felt like hours, the men turned and left, the door hissing shut behind them. Jonathan waited in silence, counting slowly to 60 before moving. When he finally emerged, he wasted no time. He slipped out the rear access panel and used an old maintenance stairwell to reach the first floor without crossing any security checkpoints. Once outside, he didn't head for his usual parking spot. Instead, he walked 2 blocks to a public garage where he kept a second vehicle registered under a false name. One of several contingencies he'd set up years ago but never thought he'd need. He climbed in, locked the doors, and drove without turning on the radio or checking his phone. Every instinct screamed that surveillance was tightening, and now, with the contents of the USB confirmed and 2 senior executives openly plotting his demise, the stakes had reached an entirely new level. That night, Jonathan didn't go home. He checked into a motel under a burner ID and disabled all wireless signals in the room. Alone, with only the hum of a portable laptop and the sickening weight of betrayal settling deeper into his chest, he reviewed the files again. Project Sentinel was more than a program. It was a pipeline. A global network leveraging banks to identify, manipulate, and compromise assets within military and government ranks. Douglas Wong wasn't just a pawn. He was a gatekeeper, and Bradford, with his access to security infrastructure, was the enforcer. Together, they had been operating right under his nose. As he sat in the dim room, watching lines of code scroll across the screen, Jonathan knew tomorrow had to be different. He couldn't rely on internal channels. He couldn't trust old alliances. If he was going to stop this, he would need outside help. And he'd have to move fast, because now they weren't just stealing money. They were hunting him. Jonathan didn't sleep that night. The motel room was quiet, but his mind wasn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Douglas Wong's cold certainty, Tom Bradford's threats, and the chilling files from Project Sentinel flashing across the screen. The weight of what he had uncovered pressed down on him like a mountain: money laundering, espionage, financial manipulation of vulnerable citizens and government workers alike. And now they knew he was aware. He couldn't do this alone anymore. The system was too corrupt, his team was compromised, his board could no longer be trusted. He needed allies. Outsiders with integrity, intelligence, and nothing to lose. That's when he remembered Brian Carter. Earlier in his investigation, Jonathan had been impressed by Carter's precision, his calm defiance in the face of an unfair loan rejection. There was something about the way he carried himself that felt trained, not just experienced. Jonathan pulled up the information he'd gathered during his undercover phase and began digging deeper. What he found was both alarming and promising. Brian Carter was a former FBI agent, once part of the Financial Crimes Task Force. He had taken early retirement 5 years ago after a botched investigation into international bank fraud ended in political cover-ups and departmental scapegoating. Since then, Carter had worked under the radar as a consultant for small businesses, but clearly he hadn't lost his instincts. If anyone could help Jonathan navigate this minefield, it was him. Jonathan arranged a discreet meeting at Brian's modest downtown office, hidden above an old bookstore. He entered without knocking. Brian looked up, clearly on edge, until he recognized Jonathan. "You," he said, standing slowly. "Didn't expect to see you again." Jonathan closed the door behind him. "I know who you are, Agent Carter, or should I say, former agent." He didn't waste time. Within 10 minutes, he laid everything out: the fake loan rejections, the elderly account drains, the money laundering trail, the offshore transfers, and finally Project Sentinel. Brian listened without interruption, his face growing more serious with each detail. When Jonathan showed him the decrypted files, Brian leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment. "This is bigger than anything I ever worked on," he finally said. "And if Wong and Bradford are involved, you're going to need serious backup." Together, they reviewed the warehouse files Jonathan had recovered. According to a hidden metadata tag, a massive data transfer was scheduled to take place at an off-site location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, marked as Transfer Node D3. The files suggested the data would be uploaded and routed to encrypted servers offshore, wiping clean any traces of wrongdoing unless stopped in time. Jonathan looked at Carter. "We need to stop that transfer. We need to be inside that building before it happens." Carter didn't hesitate. "I'll get a team," he said. "Private security, ex-agents, people who don't ask questions and know how to work off the grid." But they also needed someone to handle the technical side, someone with the skill to fight fire with fire. That's when Carter mentioned Ethan Zhang. Ethan was the son of Derek Zhang, the restaurant owner who had died by suicide after his business loan was denied under suspicious circumstances. A young cybersecurity prodigy, Ethan had been investigating his father's death for months. He had uncovered traces of tampered bank records, unauthorized data access, and suspicious account closures. Carter had kept tabs on him from afar. "He's brilliant," Carter said, "but he's also angry. He's been waiting for someone to help him make sense of what happened." They found Ethan in what used to be his father's empty restaurant, now repurposed into a hacker's den filled with laptops, cables, and tracking maps taped across the walls. When Jonathan and Carter explained the situation, Ethan didn't hesitate. "I knew it wasn't just incompetence," he said, his voice sharp with grief. "They killed him, and I'm going to expose every single one of them." The three of them formed an unlikely alliance. A former CEO, an ex-FBI agent, and a grief-stricken cybersecurity expert. But together they had the tools and the knowledge to bring the entire network crashing down. While Carter coordinated the logistics, surveillance equipment, communication intercepts, off-grid transport, Ethan focused on breaching the warehouse's internal systems. He uncovered that the facility's communication was heavily encrypted, with backup relays designed to self-direct if tampered with. That meant they had one chance to intercept the data and extract it before it vanished forever. Jonathan, meanwhile, prepared a digital cache of the most incriminating evidence they had uncovered so far, ready to be broadcast if the mission failed and he didn't make it out. On the night before the operation, the trio met in a small, secured location just outside the city. Carter laid out a floor plan of the warehouse, pointing to weak entry points and camera blind spots. "We go in at 9:00 p.m. sharp," he said. "Surveillance gets looped at 8:58, courtesy of Ethan. My guys hold the perimeter. You go in through the northwest stairwell, reach the server bank and plug in the flash node. We'll extract and copy the data in real time. If it fails..." Jonathan nodded. "Then we go public with everything we've got and let the chips fall." Carter looked him in the eye. "You sure about this? Once we go in, there's no walking away." Jonathan didn't blink. "They built this empire on fear, lies, and stolen futures. I'm not walking away. I'm tearing it down." The warehouse stood like a monolith in the middle of nowhere, abandoned, silent, and surrounded by broken fences and rusting cargo containers. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a forgotten structure from a bygone industrial era, but Jonathan Blake knew better. This was where everything came to a head. Project Sentinel, the shell corporations, the false denials, the drained accounts, the lives ruined. It all pointed here. He adjusted the small hidden mic pinned beneath his collar, checking his earpiece for Ethan's voice. "Cameras are looped," came the soft whisper. "You've got a 10-minute window. After that, their internal sweep resets." Jonathan took a breath and pushed open the side door, slipping into the shadows of the dimly lit interior. His footsteps echoed across the concrete as he moved cautiously down a hallway lined with unused pallets and crates. Then he heard them, voices muffled but unmistakably familiar. He followed them, heart pounding, until he reached the upper-level mezzanine, looking down at the center of the operation. There, beneath a network of hanging cables and makeshift workstations, stood Douglas Wong and Tom Bradford, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. They were surrounded by glowing monitors, server racks humming with activity, and boxes stamped with foreign customs seals. Wong leaned over a table, pointing at a screen. "We're at 68% on the transfer," he said. "Once the files hit the offshore relay, we're done." Bradford nodded. "Security sweep in 5. Make sure nothing gets left behind, no fingerprints." But Jonathan didn't move, because just then, from the far side of the warehouse, another figure emerged. One he hadn't seen in a decade. His hair was grayer, his face more hardened, but there was no mistaking the man walking into the light. "Hello, little brother," Richard Blake said, his voice calm and steady. "I was wondering when you'd show up." For a moment, Jonathan couldn't speak. Richard had vanished 10 years ago. A boating accident, they'd said. No body ever recovered. The loss had haunted Jonathan for years. And now here he was, standing at the center of the very operation Jonathan was trying to dismantle. "You're alive," Jonathan finally said, voice low with disbelief. "All this time?" Richard smiled faintly. "Alive, yes, and doing what had to be done." He stepped forward, ignoring Wong and Bradford's alarmed looks. "You don't understand, John. What we're doing here, it's not treason, it's protection. We're preventing a financial war. Foreign powers are trying to use our economy as a weapon. Project Sentinel gives us the power to fight back, to control the variables before they're used against us." Jonathan shook his head. "By stealing from the people, by ruining lives and manipulating veterans and seniors? That's not defense, that's corruption." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You think the world is black and white. It never was. Every empire is built on hard decisions. Every safeguard comes at a cost. We've created economic stability through precision, through power, something you've never understood." "I understand enough," Jonathan said, stepping fully into view. "I understand that you're laundering billions through innocent accounts, that you're framing denials as algorithmic decisions while pocketing money through shell companies, and that the man I once admired has become a weapon for everything we were raised to oppose." Richard's calm cracked for a moment, his voice rising. "I did this for you, for our family, for this country, because no one else would." Then, suddenly, alarms. A siren blared from overhead. Red lights pulsed along the ceiling. The warehouse flooded with the sound of boots on concrete. Dozens of armed agents stormed in through every entrance, shouting commands. "FBI, hands where we can see them." Wong and Bradford froze. Richard turned slowly, expression unreadable. Jonathan didn't move. He simply stepped aside as Carter and a full tactical unit advanced, weapons drawn. Ethan's voice buzzed in Jonathan's earpiece. "We've got the transfer. Whole thing's recorded and relayed to secure cloud storage. They can't bury this now." Jonathan exhaled, the tension slowly leaving his body. Wong was cuffed first, then Bradford. As two agents moved toward Richard, he raised his hands but spoke without fear. "You have no idea what you've done," Richard said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This wasn't just about data. It was about preparation, about preventing the next collapse, the next war." Jonathan stepped forward. "Then maybe we should let the people decide if your methods were worth the cost." Richard looked at him with something between pity and regret. "This is only the beginning, John. There are others. You've only scratched the surface." And with that, he let the agents lead him away. Jonathan watched as his brother disappeared into the mass of law enforcement and flashing lights. The warehouse was filled with the sounds of containment, of justice being restored. But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling Richard had left him with, a chilling certainty that this victory was only the start of a much longer war. The morning after the warehouse raid, the city woke to flashing headlines and breathless anchors reporting on what they called an unprecedented breach of financial ethics. News vans camped outside Franklin National's downtown tower, while pundits speculated on air about high-level resignations and internal corruption. But something about the coverage felt off, sanitized. The reports detailed the arrest of several bank executives and a mysterious offshore laundering scheme, but the deeper, more disturbing truth about Project Sentinel, about data manipulation, about weaponized financial pressure was conspicuously absent. Words like espionage, surveillance, and covert recruitment never made it to the airwaves. It was as if someone had rewritten the ending before the public could read the whole story. Jonathan watched in silence from the privacy of his office, his phone buzzing with press requests and legal consultations. But amid the chaos, a different kind of message arrived. Encrypted, unsigned, and sent through a dead email channel he hadn't used in years. The subject line was simple: "You're not done yet." Attached was a single video file. He opened it cautiously, expecting another threat. What he saw instead shook him to the core. It was grainy surveillance footage from a closed-door conference room, somewhere in Geneva if the timestamp and background signage were accurate. Around the table sat a dozen familiar faces from the international banking world: CEOs, government liaisons, security advisors. But at the head of the table, speaking with cold authority, was a man Jonathan hadn't seen in years. Samuel Prescott, his former mentor, his predecessor as CEO of Franklin National. In the footage, Prescott laid out a strategy for global financial alignment, covertly influencing markets, destabilizing foreign competitors, and using institutions like Franklin National as intelligence pivots within allied economies. His voice was calm, pressorial even. "Control is no longer political," Prescott declared. "It's economic. Influence currency, you influence power. Influence power, you write the rules." Jonathan paused the video, his hands trembled slightly. Prescott had always been the one who taught him about responsible leadership, ethical growth, transparency, or so he thought. Now it was clear Prescott hadn't just stepped away from the public eye, he had stepped deeper into the shadows, and whatever he had built, it extended far beyond Franklin National's walls. Jonathan knew he couldn't take this on alone. Within hours, he contacted Lauren Davis and Ethan Zhang, sharing the video, the metadata, and a plan. Together, they activated a secure communication channel to a watchdog group Lauren had once partnered with, an international coalition of whistleblowers, cybersecurity experts, and ex-intelligence officers who operated in the space where governments and corporations refused to look. Known only as the Ledger, this group specialized in exposing global-scale financial abuse. With their help, Jonathan began piecing together a narrative too dangerous for traditional media, one that showed not just rogue executives, but a full-blown framework of manipulation that spanned continents and institutions. The Ledger reviewed the data, verified the video, and prepared a staggered release through decentralized servers, whistleblower networks, and diplomatic allies. If mainstream channels wouldn't tell the truth, they would. As the truth spread through alternative media and independent platforms, public pressure mounted. Investigations were reopened, congressional hearings were called, and slowly the sanitized story began to unravel. Jonathan stood before Franklin National's board one final time. This time not as the hunted, but as the leader who had survived it all, and who was ready to rebuild. He presented a sweeping reform plan, full transparency in all lending decisions, real-time transaction auditing available to customers, AI systems with built-in ethical constraints overseen by independent reviewers, and an open-source platform that allowed the public to track executive financial conduct. The board was stunned. Some resisted, others resigned. But the ones who remained voted unanimously. Franklin National would become the first publicly accountable financial institution in the country. Months later, the transformation was visible. Giant screens in the bank's lobby displayed anonymized data dashboards. Senior staff had live accountability scores. Community leaders were invited into financial planning boards. Victims like Rachel Chen and Mrs. Henderson received full restitution. And Ethan Zhang? He now headed the newly formed Cyber Ethics Division, ensuring that no algorithm could ever again be used to destroy lives in silence. Lauren served as Chief Integrity Officer, reporting directly to an independent oversight committee, and Jonathan, still CEO, but more often seen in community meetings than boardrooms, became a symbol of something rare in modern finance, a leader who fought back against his own legacy, and won. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Jonathan stood in front of the bank's new mission plaque, built on trust, guarded by truth. His phone buzzed. Another message from the Ledger. No threats, no warnings, just 4 words. Ready for the next. He stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled, not with arrogance, but with clarity. The world hadn't changed overnight. Greed still festered in dark corners, power still seduced, but something had shifted. A new standard had been set. And for the first time in a long time, Jonathan Blake felt something stronger than fear. He felt purpose. And as always, Here at Deep Inside HQ, we believe that behind every closed door is a story waiting to be uncovered, a truth that challenges power, exposes injustice, and reminds us of the strength it takes to stand alone before the world takes your side. If this story moved you, made you think, or opened your eyes to the shadows behind the systems we trust, then don't just scroll away. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who still believes in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. Because the fight for truth doesn't end with one story. It begins with all of us.